My parents convinced my husband he deserved better, so he left me when I couldn't. I'm 30 years old. Not long ago, I ran into my parents and my ex-husband Scott, who's now 33, and I still don't know how to feel about it. For context, I haven't spoken to my parents or Scott in nearly 3 years. We divorced 3 years ago and haven't had any contact since. In fact, I did everything I could to avoid ever seeing them again because they nearly destroyed my life and my mental health to the point where I felt like I didn't deserve to exist. After the divorce, I moved to the suburbs and tried to build a new life, far away from anything tied to my past. So this unexpected encounter shook me. I told them something, and now I'm not sure if I did the right thing. My parents always wanted a son. And while I can't say they treated me badly in childhood, it was painfully obvious that if I'd been a boy, they would have treated me very differently. My mother even said that out loud several times. I tried so hard to become the son they never had, but I failed. After college, when I started living on my own, I tried to stay in touch with them. They were the only family I had. I wasn't close with my grandparents, I didn't have aunts or uncles. So no matter how cold they were to me, I kept trying because they were my only family. Even when they showed no real interest in my life, I made the effort to keep contact. At 23, I met Scott at a concert. There was instant chemistry. 6 months later, I introduced him to my parents. That's when everything shifted. Suddenly, they were calling me more, asking about my relationship, acting way more involved. I noticed it, but since the attention felt good, I didn't question it. The longer Scott and I dated, the more my parents inserted themselves into our lives, and at some point, it felt like we'd become one big happy family. I was thrilled. It was what I'd always wanted. So I didn't ask questions. I probably should have. We got engaged after 2 years, and married a year later. Things were great at first. I was loving married life. But 6 months in, my parents started dropping hints they wanted grandkids. I was only 26 and wasn't ready. I wanted to wait a couple more years. But under pressure, I brought it up with Scott. He was super excited about the idea, and because of that, we decided to start trying almost immediately after the wedding. Months passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, we started to suspect something might be wrong. We got tested, and I was told I was infertile. It was devastating. For both of us. But honestly, even more so for my parents. They didn't even try to hide their disappointment. The day we broke the news to both families, my father literally got up and left the room instead of comforting me. Scott and I decided to take a break from trying. We talked about IVF, but it was too expensive, and success on the first attempt wasn't guaranteed. We agreed to pause the idea until we saved up enough for multiple rounds. We accepted it, even if we were sad. My parents, however, were furious. They stopped visiting. They stopped calling. And no matter how I tried to explain it wasn't my fault, they didn't want to hear it. A few weeks later, I was so crushed by their behavior that I called them and told them exactly how I felt. I said they were being cruel, and that if this was how they reacted to me not being able to give them a grandchild, then I seriously doubted they'd be good grandparents anyway. I said they had treated me harshly my whole life just because I wasn't a boy, and that I could clearly see how differently they treated Scott. For years I tried to ignore that. I tried to make the relationship work. But I was done. I told them I didn't want contact anymore and asked them to leave me alone. Saying that was hard. I had spent years chasing their approval. But I finally accepted that I'd never get it. Instead of apologizing, they made it worse. They actually agreed that it was better to cut me off, because to them, I was a useless woman who couldn't have kids. And they didn't want anything to do with me. It was painful. But now I knew exactly where I stood in their eyes. After that phone call, I never spoke to my parents again. That relationship was done. When I told Scott about it, he was sympathetic at first. But within a few days, I started to notice his attitude changing. Slowly, he began to grow cold and distant. I tried to ignore it. I was already struggling emotionally, and I didn't want to admit, even to myself, that my husband might also be planning to leave me. I pretended everything was fine. But within a few months, he became a completely different person. Distant. Cold. I did everything I could to save our relationship. I put in maximum effort. But it didn't matter. A few months later, he came home with divorce papers in his hand and told me he was done. It wasn't exactly a shock, but I still tried to reason with him. I said we could always try to have a child later. But he said he had many reasons for leaving and didn't want to get into the details. He just wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. It was too hard for both of us, he said. The divorce took almost 7 months. It was the worst period of my life. I was completely alone, heartbroken, devastated. And then, just weeks after Scott filed for divorce and moved out, I found out from some relatives that he had moved in with my parents. I knew there was no point asking them for help. So I reached out to his parents instead. That conversation was awkward, but they were honest. They told me my parents had been in contact with Scott for months, possibly even influencing him behind my back. That's when it all clicked. Apparently, my own parents had been manipulating him. They told him he deserved better, that I wasn't enough. His parents thought it was a terrible idea, but Scott argued with them and cut them off too. I don't know exactly what my parents said to him, but I'll never forget what his parents told me. Scott hinted that my own parents had convinced him he should leave me, that he deserved a real family. They were so desperate to have a son, they took mine. After the divorce, I was destroyed. It took me months to function like a person again, but I did it. I built myself back up. I moved to the suburbs. I got a new job. Changed my look. Cut off my parents and Scott from every social channel. I told all my old friends and extended family that I didn't want them knowing anything about me. Everyone respected it. For the last 3 years, I'd been in therapy. I've been doing okay. The only thing I couldn't shake was the fact I still wanted to be a mom. Even without a husband. Even without a family. Last year, I finally did IVF. And I got pregnant. I got pregnant via IVF. And just a few weeks ago, I was walking with my daughter down my street when I saw them. My parents. And Scott. At first, I thought they came to find me, but then I realized they were walking out of a house a few blocks away. Turns out, Scott's aunt had just moved into the neighborhood. But they saw me. And I froze. I wanted to run. I should have gone back inside. But I couldn't move. They walked over. Smiled. Said hi. And then asked about the baby. Because, after all, I was supposed to be infertile. I told them the truth. By then I'd realized what was happening and started walking home. But Scott stopped me. He said he was so glad to see me that he'd been thinking about me a lot lately. He said our meeting felt like a sign from the universe. That maybe we could try again. My parents stood behind him, nodding, telling me I should invite them over so we could catch up on everything they missed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was horrified that they had the audacity to ask that after everything they'd done. It took me 3 years to rebuild my life. I'm still in therapy. And now they want a fresh start? I snapped. I told them I'd rather let a pack of bloodthirsty wild animals into my house than let them in, because at least animals are better. I told them to drop the act. To stop pretending like they cared, because the only reason they wanted back into my life was my child. They didn't care about me. They never did. My parents wanted a grandchild, and now that they saw one, they wanted a second chance. Scott? Scott just wanted someone who could get pregnant. Now that I'd proven I could, suddenly I was worth his time again. I was disgusted. To them, I wasn't a person. I was just a womb. They left me at my lowest, when I needed them most. I always expected betrayal from my parents. They made it clear my entire life that they wished I'd been a boy. To them, a woman's worth was measured only in whether she could have kids. But Scott? That betrayal still burns. He agreed with them. He left me in the worst moment of my life. I remembered every horrible thing my parents had said to me, and I threw their words right back at them. Since I was such a worthless woman. Since Scott deserved better. Then they should all do what they're good at and stay the hell out of my life. I've always been a quiet, reserved person. But that day, standing in the middle of the street, I screamed. 3 years of rage exploded all at once. It wasn't pretty. When I finished, I ran home. Slammed the door. Locked it. And collapsed. I felt terrible afterward. I stayed home for a few days with my daughter. I kept replaying the encounter over and over in my mind. Then, yesterday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally I don't answer unknown calls. But this time I did. It was Scott. In the background, I could hear my parents whispering. They weren't even trying to be quiet. They wanted me to know they were there. I stayed calm. I told him never to call again or I'd take legal action. I said the same applied to my parents. The only reason I picked up was to make sure they heard it from me directly. We're done. We've been done for 3 years. I'm not going back. But Scott begged me to listen. I let him talk. He admitted it was a mistake, what he and my parents did. But he said they were just disappointed. They all had such high hopes of having a baby. When they found out I was infertile and didn't want to do IVF until we saved up more, they didn't handle it well. Now, he said, they just want a second chance. To be part of my life. To prove they're worthy. I paused, and told him I didn't believe a word of it. If they hadn't seen me with a baby that day, they would have kept ignoring me. That's the truth. I was about to hang up, but then my parents jumped in. They said this, my anger, my bitterness, was why they cut me off in the first place. That I was being selfish. That I only thought of myself after finding out I was infertile instead of giving them space. Instead of comforting them. They said that's why they all pulled away and left me alone. I didn't say another word. I just hung up. You know what the worst part is? They tried to gaslight me. They acted like I was the problem, like I was supposed to comfort them when I was the one who lost everything. You might wonder, if my parents always wanted a son so badly, why didn't they just have another child? Well, after my birth, my mom had serious complications. Doctors told her to wait a few years before trying again. But by then she was already over 30. Waiting meant she'd be nearly 40. Too risky. So she didn't. She struggled to conceive me in the first place. Just like I did with my daughter. The only difference? When my mom went through it, her mother-in-law was cruel to her. But when I went through it, it was my own mother who turned cruel. As for Scott, I never fully understood why he clung to my parents the way he did. He had perfectly fine parents of his own. He was their only child, and they loved him. Every time I visited them, I could see how much they cared about him. So why did he trade that for my parents? I never asked before. I just tried to move on. But now, after everything, I felt like I needed answers. So I reached out to Scott's parents. At first it was awkward, we hadn't spoken in 3 years. Last time we talked was during the divorce. But they were kind. Glad to hear from me. I asked why Scott had become so close to my parents, and if he still kept in contact with them. They told me that after a falling out, they eventually reconciled with Scott, but yes, he still kept ties with my parents. Apparently, my parents had been manipulating him from the beginning. Even while we were dating, they invited him to dinner alone, even when I wasn't around. They gave him gifts, wrote him checks. They made him feel like family, like the son they never had. And Scott liked it. He was proud. He thought it meant he'd impressed them. He didn't realize he was just a placeholder for the boy they wished they'd had. Worse, remember those checks? The money Scott once offered to use for IVF, even though we couldn't afford it? Turns out, that money came from my parents. I had no idea. He never told me. Because he didn't want me to know how close he was with them behind my back. Even then, I refused to do IVF until we had enough saved on our own. And my parents used that to convince Scott that I wasn't committed. That he deserved better. That he should find someone who believed in him. Within months, they'd completely turned him against me. Scott's parents apologized. They didn't agree with what he did, but he was their only child. They couldn't abandon him. I didn't blame them. I thanked them for telling me the truth. Now I finally understood. And I had no reason to ever speak to any of them again. Final update. A few weeks ago, I finally returned to work after taking some time off. I still had parental leave saved up since I didn't take all 6 months at once, and my company has a flexible policy. At home, it was just my daughter and her nanny, a woman I trust deeply. She has excellent references, and I know her personally. She's incredible. Then, during my workday, I got a call from her. She said she had taken my daughter to her own home because she didn't feel safe staying in mine. Why? Because Scott showed up. He was outside, yelling for me to come out. When he realized I wasn't home, he started pounding on the door, screaming, swearing. My daughter started crying. The nanny acted fast. She called me immediately, then took my daughter through the backyard gate to her house, just a few minutes away. While I was still on the phone, I called the police and raced home. By the time I got there, officers were already on the scene. And Scott? He was drunk. At noon. It was shocking, but not surprising. I filed a report. It was the final straw. Now I had a reason and proof to get a restraining order. I gave the cops my security camera footage. Scott was arrested on the spot. The nanny returned with my daughter shortly after. I gave her the rest of the day off and stayed home with my baby. I might take a few more days off work, too, but I'm not complaining. Because it means more time with the only person in this world who truly matters. Last update. It's been a few weeks. Scott is officially under a no-contact order. Thanks to my security footage, it wasn't hard to get. My parents haven't reached out since, maybe because they saw how badly Scott embarrassed himself. Or maybe they finally got the message. Scott's parents told me they've stopped speaking to him too. Apparently, he's been struggling. He still wants to start a family. But without a partner, and unwilling to adopt, he's stuck. Maybe that's why he showed up that day. But that doesn't mean I have to forgive him. Or them. They still trash me to relatives, trying to play the victims. But nobody buys it anymore. Everyone knows what they did. And I'm so glad they'll never meet my daughter. Because she deserves better than them. And I will be the kind of parent they never were.